something very complementary to what Alison was addressing, which was basically right now corporate taxation. So corporate taxation is, or what should companies like Google, Amazon, etc., be paying. But of course, there is another tax, which is the personal income tax that most of the smaller businesses and all of us, some of us, most of us, are paying. And that's something we know much, much less about. For various reasons. In particular, the nature of the income tax system in most countries, which is what economists call progressivity. So we have something that's built into the income tax system that makes the tax rate for people who earn a lot different from the one of people who earn less or little, which is different from most corporate tax codes and laws around the globe, which makes it much harder to figure out what at least the theoretical tax somebody should pay would be. So I remember when I moved to Switzerland, I was, since I had incomes collected from Austria, Germany, and Switzerland in 1 year, that made my life miserable. At the time, I didn't know anything about income taxation. I was paying basically 3 tax accountants, one in each country, Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. And on each of the doors of these tax accountants, it said, international tax consultant. So these people claimed that they knew a lot about these international tax laws. So I was paying basically 2/3 to the German colleague, 1/3 to the Austrian, and close to 0 to the Swiss. Basically something, the fees that I paid were basically inversely related to the average incomes in these countries and merely reflected the complexity of the tax system in these countries. But the complexity was irrelevant because these people were all supposed to calculate the same thing, namely the tax I was owing to these countries altogether. And their cost was hugely different, and the best thing I ever encountered was they came up with tax bills that I was owing, which were apart by 1/3, min-max. Can you imagine? I mean, these people are professionals, and now think of the policymakers and politicians that put these laws in place. Okay, so this is where my interest actually starts, and I hope that I can convey some of the interest here. This is actually ongoing research, so a piece of it came out in the American Economic Review in February, documenting some of the facts that I didn't know about 3 years ago, but now I'm a little bit better, so I could do your tax accounts in Fiji or whatever it is, in all the countries of this world actually, if you gave me all the things I need to do it, your income, your marital status, the number of your children, and the age, etc. I could do your tax accounts pretty well. I have a computer program to do it better probably than KPMG. And that's what I want to report on right now. I won't tell you much about normative things, as economists call them. So basically the way in which we should design our systems, I want to report about the facts because there's very little that we know. And the reason is that the complexity of things involve two animals. It's like shooting a deer from a wiggling stool. It's very hard. The one thing that you need is basically a fair amount of detail on the income distribution in a country. Across all the percentiles, ideally, if you want to address things that relate to effective taxation of people. And the second is you need to have what I was putting much effort into here, a collection of the tax calculators in all these countries. That's what KPMG and PricewaterhouseCoopers and other companies make their money off, basically. And what we did in this project was basically, or what we were doing is collecting for all the countries and territories in this world. It makes life more complicated in countries such as the United States or Switzerland, etc., where you have multi-layer tax systems in federations where basically different layers of the federal hierarchy basically have their own right in taxing citizens, and you have multiple layers that you have to accumulate up. That makes life more difficult because it's harder to report on things. Basically, in the U.S., you'd have to go down to the exact place where somebody lives. So to make reporting easier, I'm referring to the capitals of these countries right now, even though I have the data for all the different jurisdictions in these countries. So the idea is to get a long panel. I want to understand what changed to tax systems, because I mean, basically the actual origin of my interest is I want to understand why I see this much discomfort voiced by the electorates around the world, and that has to do apparently with inequality. It has to do with globalization. If we read the news, some of these things come together, and the question is, why does the median voter and why do people across the income distribution feel they have been left out of reaping some of the gains from openness and cross-border exchange? that has to do with pre-tax inequality that may have changed, and there is some element where globalization plays a role in that. Of course, we know we have basically empirical work documenting that people working in big companies, multinational firms, working for exporting firms, etc., get premia. That a firm getting market access and making big profits, not only management but eventually also other parts of the educated personnel at least can participate in the gains of these firms. Less so in less growing and smaller firms. So there is an element where globalization plays a role in generating inequality that has to do with education and other things. But then there is something that relates to taxation as well, and the question is, how does the tax code change over time? Because if we read the theoretical literature in economics, they basically advise us, well, tell me how much your government needs, and I'm going to design you a tax code. Given that you give me also some detail about the income distribution of the people, I can design you a tax code and will tell you how ideally, if you're the best possible dictator, how you want to design the tax code across the income distribution. And basically, the old view on this was, well, given that there is some inequality around, that is basically just an outcome of a lottery. We shouldn't basically people have too much joy of lotteries out there, but we can tax at least some of that away. That leads to a theory of tax progressivity. That was the view from a world without openness. Now, with openness, we have a problem because some of the people who can enjoy the bigger benefits from openness, they're more mobile. And that means that theorists now tell us, well, if basically, it's like with a bag filled with water, if you step on it, the water moves to the side. And that's what high-income earners can do as well. So then theory tells you, well, you want to tax the ones that can't escape as easily. When I teach this stuff, I tell my students that means implicitly taxing families with children in school age. Basically, essentially, that's what the advice of the economist is. In this regard, basically, you want to tax the tax base that can't escape taxation because nobody wants to be taxed. The question is, what do we see in the data? And up until recently, we didn't know much. And if you want to see it, basically, you have to, when you look into all these tax laws, as I did, you come up with the finding that there is basically 12 household types you have to monitor, because all the income tax systems on this globe, if you lump them all together and want to put this into a program to calculate your tax owed, basically you find out, well, some countries, they have a special treatment for spouses, some countries have a special treatment for women, some countries have a special treatment for the number of children, like France have the code familial, it's called, basically, where the denominator of the tax code includes the number of children. That means that the more children you have, the flatter is your tax progressivity. So that's horrendously complicated, and that makes you coming up with all these different types of people out there that you wanna address when you want to ask questions. How did the tax code change in favor of or against women, for instance? That's an issue. Fertility. I have this paper where I looked into Saarland, a state of Germany that flipped forth and back between being German and being French a number of times in history, last time 1953. And by doing that, basically, they changed from the French tax code to the German one. The German tax code does not have this denominator that depends on the number of children, so there was an immediate punishment of people with a lot of children, families with a lot of children. And I was calculating for all the different people in the income distribution of Saarland within 1 year, so faster than the pill, basically, that was introduced at around that time. People reacted in that, and fertility dropped to the German level from the French one. So anyway, so tax matters for families and whatever. So these are the different household types here. And we account for all these benefits and allowances, whatever it is. If you look at the top marginal tax rate in 1980, it's just a historical snapshot. Dark is higher, light is lower. That's the marginal tax rate. That's basically what we do is we collect these things and then we portray them from an income of $1 to 1 million at each dollar. That's the situation for the top. Say, if you had an income of $1 million a year, that would be on the last dollar you earned, that would be the tax rate. That's the number of kinks in a tax schedule. It's also something very interesting. If you had a flat tax with a zero tax, right? That means that nobody in the income distribution pays any tax. That would be very, very red here.
Sorry to interrupt, because this is critical. Did you say you were taking into account the tax rate on the provinces and the states and the
Here,
municipalities in this calculation?
I do.
Because I noticed that the Canadian rate is lower than the U.S. rate,
Yes.
but it isn't.
Right. I can do it. Here, I'm resorting to the capital here. That's why you don't see, I can do it. I have the data for doing it at the provincial level. I don't here. So Canada appears in
I
one
just wanted
color.
to know what
Yes,
it was.
and I'm doing the same in Switzerland and same, yeah. So there is several countries where this is inappropriate and it just reflects the capital, but this is just for portrayal. So this is the number of kinks. If you want to talk about tax complexity, which is an issue too, you can look into how more or less complex tax systems were, and it's not necessarily a reflection of progressivity, because you're also progressive if you basically have an allowance at the bottom of the income distribution, and the first tax paid is owed at, say, an annual income of $10,000, and then it jumps to something and stays at that. It still means that every dollar you earn or every euro you earn is going to pay more taxes the more you earn, right? So that's progressive too, apart from, of course, even a proportional tax rate where everybody pays the same rate means that people who earn more pay higher taxes, which is a big confusion, I think, in the media, and in part the media are responsible for that confusion because they ask the question inappropriately, inaccurate. So I read all these questions. I'm getting really angry from all these newspapers who do these surveys asking people whether they think that people who earn more income should pay more taxes. That doesn't say that the income tax system should be progressive or not. I'd love to know what citizens want to have, and no newspaper manages to give me that information. It's really stupid. Anyway. So inequality, so these things are just rates at the top, right? If you want to talk about the distribution of incomes, then of course you have to know how before tax incomes are situated in that distribution. And for that you need data on income inequality. And I was really shocked when I entered that. So I was close to facing a lawsuit by the organization that publishes the Luxembourg Income Study. That's basically a survey where European countries, the United States, some less developed countries also, provide individual level anonymized data on people's income, on their marital status, etc., and on the tax that people pay. I was running programs at their servers, and one morning I come to the office and they basically tell me that I'm facing lawsuit. I said, wait a second, I'm calling them up, what's happened? They accused me of trying to extract individual level information on people. I said, wait, A, I don't have the names of these people. B, I was extracting centiles. That means 100 bins of equal income size in the distribution. I was calculating averages of. It turned out that some of the countries they have just contain 100 sampled individuals. This is how little we know about income distributions. I was positively shocked. So this was sorted. I now have, when I use their microdata, I'm using only 50 quantiles, so 50 bins rather than 100 to do that. It turns out that it's actually not so necessary. One endeavor in that direction led me to finding out that when you assume some form of the distribution, which is called the log normal distribution, it's just some functional form, that you can estimate by only knowing two things: an inequality coefficient for a country and the average wage. If you have these two data points, it's just two information that you can get from the World Bank. Very easy to find. If you have those two, and you give me the microdata for Germany, I'm fitting the income distribution, it takes you back. I tell you for sure. It's amazing how well I can estimate all the centiles of incomes in the distribution. So this is a good information. If I have that, then I can basically tell you about the effective tax rates. I can calculate that for the average earner. I can calculate for every centile, every 1,000th for the distribution of incomes, which is interesting to know if you want to learn about the inequality removing effect of the income tax system. Because remember, the main reason for why we have personal income tax systems are basically two. Government needs money in order to finance productive goals: education, SDGs, whatever it is, right? All these things cost money, and the more elaborate our systems become, the more we need to find such funds. That's one goal. The second goal is, this is the prime instrument that people will tell you in the economics profession. If you have heterogeneity of incomes and somehow want to mitigate it, this is the thing you need to use, because that directly addresses this stuff. This is not, putting out free tickets for people in retirement and getting reductions for children in public swimming pools. That's nice too, but this is the thing you should use, is what economists will tell you, to address all the different income levels across the distribution of incomes. So this is the effective marginal average marginal tax rate. So if I take the average income earner, that guy pays a certain tax rate on the next dollar earned. That's that. For that, I need to have the income distribution as well. Gini coefficients is what I said. Here's something interesting. When I compare 1980 to 2012, what I'm doing here is I'm looking into, give me the income distribution before tax and give me the same distribution after tax. So the difference between these coefficients giving me a measure of inequality is going to tell me how much, to which extent taxation removes inequality or mitigates it, right? The lower that number is, it's between 0 and 100, that's the delta, basically, the equalizing effect of the income tax system, if you like. The lower that number is, the more equalization there is. So interestingly, you see in 1980 for the OECD is basically lined up on a vertical line. So in essence, what I see from this figure is inequality before tax has nothing to do with how much income taxation is used to remove that inequality. That's there for some other reason. Countries have it in place. Some countries redistribute more, but they don't redistribute more because their income distribution is more unequal. That's a political process in the background that's doing something else. There is great heterogeneity, and basically if I draw a line through the red cloud here that's vertical, that's even more vertical and clearer vertical in 2012 than in 1980. So basically what I see from these two figures is before income tax inequality has become more similar in the OECD, has become more similar worldwide, by the way, according to this figure. And in the OECD before, in 1980 as well as in 2012, how much you redistribute has nothing to do with the inequality you face before tax, right? There's something else in the political process that generates that. On average, it is true that when pooling across all countries, both in 1980 and even more so in 2012, on average, countries that had a lot of inequality before taxation were redistributing more. That's true on average. That's what I said before. If you want to talk about redistribution and the income tax system, you have to distinguish between all these household types. This here is just looking at males. So this is the distribution of effective tax rates and redistribution among males. So lower is better, is more redistribution. So darker blue countries are redistributing more. This is the same thing for families with a single earner and 2 children. We account for all the spousal, etc. deductions. This is something interesting too. When you look at public opinion in countries that believe that redistribution is important and poverty is a concern, we don't see systematically more redistribution through the income tax system in place. So it is totally unrelated. There is a fundamental disconnect between what policymakers put in place and what people think is the problem. This is the paper that came out in AR. I want to show you quickly because these figures are just remarkable. This is the question. So income tax is a system in place that is the prime candidate to help the poor and reshuffle income basically from the wealthier to the less wealthy when it comes to personal incomes. When I look at the OECD countries, 1980 to 1993, you see this figure there that's basically upward sloping, and the more so, the higher you move to the higher percentiles of the income distribution. This is across all OECD countries in 1980 to 1993, telling you higher openness, meaning more risk transmission from abroad, leads governments on average to redistribute more from higher incomes to lower incomes. So in the old days, we would have said, okay, whatever generates risk, that risk can be mitigated by the, when it comes to employment risk and other social security types of risks, that risk can be mitigated by income tax contributions, and governments would levy them more heavily on higher income individuals than on lower income individuals. This is exactly what you see in the left panel. Now, then there was the Uruguay round, and a lot of trade agreements and a lot of openness. Multinational firms came in place, cross-border organization of value chains, and more mobility of the high-income earners, expatriates, managers that have, you know, homes and jobs across different places. Look at the same thing in the 1994 to 2007 period. It basically is just reverted. So what you see from this figure is what I call the hollowing out of the middle class. So where can you cheaply get the money that you need for all these additional tasks that you need to do? Refurbishing your transport infrastructure, securing people against higher risk of unemployment. In the middle of the income distribution, that's where the masses are, right? In the left tail, you have no chance because people have these brackets. But in the middle, there is a big mass of people. Those are, by the way, the ones that lead to all these electoral outcomes in the context of Brexit and other things. These are the ones that have the feeling that they have been left out when it comes to reaping the gains from openness. They're the ones that governments are leaning on. And in the far right tail, you see that there is less taxation. That's a textbook case of what theorists would tell you with mobile people in the right tail. This is exactly how this should look like, and that's what you see, right? So this is where I should probably end. This is very robust, and you find it even, by the way, when you look into the United States and migration between states in the United States, you see a similar figure. It's a little bit cushioned for an important reason. Within a federation where you have a federal tax system, the federal tax system, and that's something you might say calls for international coordination. The federal tax system with a top layer that serves as a coordinator between the states, of course, reduces exactly that, because the top level of the federation can say, well, you can't escape my taxation by moving to another state. And that's exactly what we could learn for coordination internationally. Thanks a lot.